Hey everyone, and welcome. So I can't figure out what's going on. I keep finding these cases, and they're super interesting, just on the surface. And then I start putting them together, and they turn into this like never-ending rabbit hole, which sometimes is a good thing, sometimes it's fun. Other times it's like, come on, it takes forever because I keep finding more and more and more. And these are things that were never put out in the regular media. They weren't highlighted, and some of them weren't even put out at all. And it's stuff that I feel like you need to know because it's important to the case. So I'm pulling it all in and compiling it and highlighting it. And it's taking days, and I don't want to leave you hanging because you might get hangry. Ha ha. So I go and look for some fun little case, something quick and easy, like just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And I think I found it. And I'm like, oh, this is cute, cute little case, cute little case. This little case, we'll just throw it in there. And then the next thing I know, it's like a shit show. Like, what is going on? I don't get it. I know you guys have been enjoying the attorney discipline cases, so I was kind of looking at those. Some of the older ones, because you have to look at the older ones, because some of those courts take like forever to get an opinion out, and I don't want to leave you hanging because I know how much you hate that. Unless you're the Florida court. That one Florida court, OMG. They're like, let's order a pizza and pull an all-nighter, and get this opinion out the next day. To be young and energetic again, I tell you, I miss that. But I digress. So I'm working on what Law and Crime calls the Florida Karen case, which is crazy. I wanted to have the first part today. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. I'm shooting for tomorrow, but I'm not sure I'm going to make it. The body cam footage is so difficult to understand. It's taking forever. So last night I found this super interesting attorney discipline case. Easy, simple, nothing fancy. Substitute teacher. Why an attorney is working as a substitute teacher, I don't know. I don't care. Whatever. He acts up while he's teaching, gets in trouble, and gets disciplined on the attorney side. Why is he working as a substitute teacher? I don't know. It is like a shit show of epic proportions. And I'm sure people living in Kansas are probably well aware of this. And I don't know. I thought it was simple. It looked so simple. It was a simple story. And then it's like the onion peeling back the layers, like make it stop. I want something small and simple, the quick and easy. Give me quick and easy. And this is, now indulge me for a minute and we'll get to the good stuff. I've been told my entire life, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I didn't really heed that advice much. I mean, the older I get, the more I'm realizing, yeah, don't waste your time. But there's two things that I have always kept my mouth shut on, and that's politics and religion. No good comes from discussing those. I do share views on certain things that I think are vitally important, like access to mental health and things like that. But for the most part, I try and keep my mouth shut. It's not going to do any good if we differ on things to try and argue on the surface level of these major issues. It's not. And it's only going to cause friction and strife, and there's no reason for that. I think a good example is, I don't need to know what you think about same-sex marriage, whether you think it's right or wrong. No one we're watching is going to change what the laws are related to whether that is allowed or disallowed. But if we're looking at a custody case that's involving a same-sex couple who are having issues for whatever reason, and somehow that becomes involved in it, we can have a discussion based upon that specific issue and those specific circumstances. And it can be a respectful discussion about the pros and cons, that, we weigh the different circumstances. And that's something that I really enjoy doing. And one of the reasons that I still enjoy this channel, despite all the drama and BS that comes along with it, is that I love hearing your experiences, your opinions, because when you present them in a nice way, people who are just nasty are just nasty. And I've gotten to the point where I'm just going to block people who just want to be nasty and not offer anything substantial. Like, if you just want to attack other people, go do that somewhere else. Like, offer something of substance. And I appreciate that because lots of times you change my mind by giving me perspective outside of my little bubble. And I think that's important. Okay, I apologize for babbling on, but I wanted to throw that out there to remind you all before we proceed with the upcoming shit show production that is sure to provoke some passionate responses because it touches on everything that's like a trigger point for everybody. We're going to try really hard not to discuss what this attorney believes is right or wrong. We don't care about that. What we're looking at is how he was criminally charged for his actions. I mean, that was done. It's done. It's not going to be changed. And how that impacted his Kansas bar license. It's really hard not to judge his actions. And you know how I mentioned politics? Yeah, this totally gets better because, it can't just be a lawyer and a teacher. No. He's a former member of the Kansas House of Representatives. Yeah, a politician, a lawyer, and a substitute teacher walk into a bar. What the fuck? You can't make this shit up. You can't make it up. You couldn't make it up if you tried. So Mark Samsel is the subject of today's video. And he was born and raised in Wellsville, Kansas. It's this tiny city in Franklin County with a population under 2,000. I guess there's no minimum number of people for a city anymore. He graduated from Wellsville High, which is where this incident took place, ironically. And he went on to attend Missouri Valley College, where he earned degrees in political science, public administration, and business administration. He was there for a little longer than the normal, 4 years. Then he continued on to the University of Kansas School of Law, where he graduated in 2010 and then was admitted to the Kansas bar, in September of that year. So according to his website, samsellaw.com, Mark practiced with the firm Lathrop Gage LLP in Kansas City, all the way up till 2018, when he decided to dip his toe in the political piranha tank. And he ran for the District 5 seat in the Kansas House of Representatives. So in August of 2018, Mark narrowly won the Republican primary, but then by November, he had secured himself a 72.8% victory over his Democratic opponent. His first term in office, he introduced quite a few bills. It's kind of unusual for a newcomer. Usually they kind of, jump onto other people's bills and do a lot of support work just to get the feel of things. But no, he jumped in both feet first. And I'm telling you all of this just so you can get an idea of his personality, since we don't really get to see a lot of that in a 20-minute hearing. Although you do get to see a lot of it in the video of him in the classroom. So quickly, some of the bills that he introduced during his first term were looking to have endorsements by individuals for candidates, like when somebody endorses a candidate, that they have to do it in writing. And if the candidate wants it removed from their website, like they don't want you to endorse them, you have to remove it. There was creating the crime of harassment of a sports official, designating the watermelon as the state fruit of Kansas. I can't imagine why that one died. They could even have the watermelon crawl as their official song.
Drink, don't drive, do the watermelon crawl.
Liberty protection for business that participate in high school work-based learning programs, limiting utilization review conducted by mental health plans under certain circumstances involving treatment of mental health and other substance abuse disorders, due process for terminating teachers' contracts, establishing restrictions on the use of step therapy protocols by health insurance plans, allowing certain criminal offenses to be expunged automatically, requiring transportation network companies to require drivers to display official trade dress. I'm not really sure what that is. And requiring notification to patients that the effects of a medication pregnancy termination may be reversible. I need someone to explain that to me like I'm 5, because how do you undo a termination? Do you have to start all over from the beginning? That's like a Laura Owens level thing, and I'm not even touching that. So, not surprisingly, all of those bills died, most of them in committee, which means no one even talked about them. Like nothing happened. Mark did get several bills pushed through, though, to give him credit for that. There's bills that go through that have legal purposes and are creating laws, rules, regulations, things like that. Then there's other ones that the purpose is just to put a resolution on the books like, hey, we want to recognize this person for doing this. He headed into the 2020 election and he took 60% of the vote in the primary, which is pretty good, and 77% in the general election, which, you know, that's pretty substantial. He tried to help shape the country again by, you know, creating some laws, but he didn't quite make the splash that he didn't even make much of a ripple. So this time he put up bills for allowing restricted driver's license holders to drive to and from worship services for any religious organizations at age 15, requiring statutory due process procedures for school districts, non-renewal or termination of a teacher contract. There may be something to that. Creating Kansas Youth Advisory Council, urging Congress to extend daylight savings time throughout the year for the whole nation. I think a lot of people jumped on that, but Kansas wasn't going for it. And creating the crime of abuse of a sports official and providing criminal penalties. None of those made it through. But he was able to get his name on like half a dozen resolutions again. What's incredibly ironic about his second term is that Samsel had one major success, the one thing that actually worked in his career. And it was a bill to increase the penalties for stalking a minor. It actually passed. However, the timing couldn't have been worse. It was signed just days after he was arrested on 3 counts of misdemeanor battery. And this was for his actions while he was acting as an emergency substitute teacher at his alma mater. So what I find most interesting about this case, as I was stumbling through the cluster that it is the different ways that the events were summarized in this case by the different entities. And I'm not really sure the best way to present it to you from here, because I know you're probably sick of me rambling on, and I'm sick of rambling on too, and I apologize. So if you have a better way, if you have any suggestions, please politely leave them in the comments. I would really appreciate them. Now, just to clarify again, this is all stemming from criminal charges that this attorney racked up while he was serving as an emergency substitute teacher in 2020. Now, this is May 2020, and for those of you who don't remember the timeline of what happened, it is crystal clear to me because I received my MS diagnosis in January of that year, and it was a month and a half later when everything shut down. And so it was February into March of that year when the whole world shut down, and that was incredibly stressful to have both things going on at the same time. So May of that year, Florida was like shut down. Everything was virtual. There wasn't in-person classes. So it's interesting that Kansas not only had in-person classes, but they're so interactive, touchy-feely. I don't know. Just to break things up, I'm going to start by showing you a video that one of the students took during part of this incident. It doesn't cover the whole incident. It doesn't cover everything that happens, but it does give you a very good idea of what the incident is about. And then I'll read the police report to you that explains everything.
Make babies! Who likes making babies? That feels good, doesn't it? Procreate. He says encourage it. You haven't masturbated? Don't answer that question.
I'm not going to answer that question, no.
Thank you. I told you not to. God already knows enough. You're about ready to anger me and get the wrath of God. Do you believe me when I tell you that God has been speaking to me? I could put the wrath of God on you right now because that's what he's telling me to do. You should run and scream because the devil's getting the hell out of my classroom. And he's going to hurt worse than childbirth, which is another part of the Bible. Plus, you have permission to kick him in the balls if you got the opportunity. So who put together the Bible? Multiple stories from different people. It wasn't even just one editor. It was multiple different editors tried to combine all the stories while there were distractions from the devil. won't kick you in the balls. I'm scared. I was hard on this kid, right? We love this kid, right?
No.
God still loves you, and I still love you. Don't.
We?
Oh, gee.
Now you made me forget what my point was, because even I get distracted.
Straight up.
Talking, everybody's talking. This is called distraction. This is the devil working right now, not the distraction. No, you are supposed to speak the Lord's name proudly. Give him all the glory. And when you do, he will provide for your needs. Would you like me to introduce to a sophomore who's tried himself 3 times at because he has 2 parents and they're both females?
Who does?
I'm not giving you his name.
I thought you were talking about me.
Are your parents gay?
No.
Well then listen.
Oh,
I said both of his parents are female. He's a foster kid. His alternatives in life were having no parents or foster care parents who are gay.
Okay, they can be gay if they want.
Maybe. What's my point? My point is the kid has tried to himself 3 times. And he's one of the best kids on the planet. How do you think I'm going to feel if he...
Not good.
Awful. Hey, I had a lesson to go through today, and because there's been non-stop distractions, how much of it did you get done?
A lot. I got my tool done.
No, you got your crap done. What's more important, what you want or what God needs you to do? False. Do you like being miserable?
Yeah.
Are you telling the truth?
Yes.
You're lying. Guess what people who say they're telling the truth do all the time? He's called the Senate President, Ty Masterson from Andover, Kansas. He is the devil disguised in a suit and a smile. And Christians follow him because they don't realize he's the devil. Is that funny? Yeah, it is, excuse my language, fucking our state of Kansas right now, and it's causing kids to kill themselves. And I have to attend their funerals knowing what's going on. Classroom in Mr. Hunsaker's classroom. Do you think we want to do this? No, we had a lesson to do. Is it kind of funny? Yeah. Are they ever going to learn? God only knows.
So this is the affidavit that is usually a sealed document. There were multiple media outlets that filed whatever documents are necessary in Kansas to have this unsealed and published. Generally, they just say they're charged with battery in violation of KSA, whoop, whatever, and that's it. But they actually petitioned to have this unsealed, and so we do have the details of specifically what led to him being charged with the 2 counts of battery, which is what was recommended by Detective Hargesheimer, indicated that on April 29th, 2021, he was notified to assist the Wellsville Police Department in an investigation. I later found the investigation involved a substitute teacher, Mark Samsel, battering and abusing, well, we know the initials are TE. I responded to Wellsville High School and spoke with TE in a conference room. Present in the room was Lieutenant Laswell and, by TE's parents' request, Principal Josh Adams. I first introduced myself as a detective with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. I then asked him if he knew why I wanted to speak with him. He stated he knew it was about what happened during 5th period the day prior. I asked him to tell me about what happened in 5th period. TE stated he arrived in the art classroom approximately 11:18 a.m. and saw Mark Samsel, the substitute teacher. He said, "What's up, Mark?" Is that how we talk to teachers now? I mean, is that a thing? Like, we don't even use last names anymore? He stated class began. Mark began talking about God, the devil, the wrath of God, how rap music is wrong and kids should listen to other types of music. Mark then began talking about how a black boy he knows tried to unalive himself. TE stated he started listening to Mark about the unaliving boy and then didn't want to hear it for a 4th time, so he put his earbuds in. TE stated the class was scared but didn't show it. He also stated they felt confused and did not know what to do. TE then walked across the room and began talking to a friend in the class. He stated Mark kept yelling about everything. TE stated he began talking to another kid in the class, and Mark told TE not to talk when he's talking because TE did not have the floor. At approximately 11:25, Mark then threatened TE with holding hands with another boy from class and go outside and walk around the track. TE ignored him, and TE and another student and several other kids from the class went outside through a door in the classroom that leads directly out of the building. The kids then spoke about what was going on in the classroom, and after approximately 5 minutes, went back inside the classroom. TE stated he stood in the classroom for approximately 5 minutes after re-entering the room. Mark, while standing directly in front of TE, grabbed TE's shoulders with both hands and shoved him against the wall. TE took Mark's hands and threw him off him. TE was able to free himself from Mark's grip. TE then ran to the other side of the room, jumped over a table, and sat down in his seat. I asked TE how Mark reacted, what his mood was like when he was throwing him into the wall. TE stated Mark seemed mad, but also as though he was playing around. He stated he pushed him into the wall pretty hard. I asked TE why he ran around the room after Mark pushed him in the wall. TE stated he did not want to be touched. He was scared of what had just happened and wanted to get away from Mark. This was the first time during the incident TE felt fear. TE stated after he was pushed into the wall, he spoke to a friend in the class and then went to talk to someone else again. Then went to gather art supplies to work on his project. TE stated he had not yet started on the project because Mark was yelling the entire time and he couldn't pay attention. Approximately 10 minutes went by after being pushed into the wall, and TE left his seat again. TE stated Mark stepped in front of him, looked angry as though he was going to do something, and told TE he was going to kick him in the balls. Nice. TE stated he ignored this threat because he did not believe a teacher would ever do that. TE then stated approximately 10 minutes went by. Another 10 minutes went by when Mark kicked him in the testicles with his right foot. WTF. But TE moved back in an attempt to dodge the strike. TE stated the kick did strike him in the testicles hard enough that he winced over in pain. He stated he was confused, in pain, and had to catch his breath before returning to his seat. He stayed in his seat for approximately 10 minutes before he left the classroom by his own accord. At approximately 11:50 a.m., he waited for the period to end at 12:05 p.m. in the hallway. TE showed me and allowed me to photograph his injuries. Oh, dear God. There was a mark that could be described as road rash, approximately the size of a golf ball, on his right shoulder blade. There was also a scratch on his left shoulder blade that seemed to travel across his shoulder from the outside towards his spine. This scratch was approximately 3 to 4 inches in length. TE stated after the incident, his back and his testicles were in pain. Yeah. He stated it took approximately 10 to 15 minutes for the pain to subside. TE then showed me a video on his phone that someone else had sent him. The video showed Mark grabbing TE and pushing him into the wall and stating, "I'm going to unleash the wrath of God on you right now." It then showed TE breaking free from Mark and running away screaming. On 4/29/2021 at approximately 1:24 p.m., I responded to Mark Samsel's home address with Sergeant Vega and Deputy Rivers. There, we contacted Mark and informed him he was being detained and being taken to the sheriff's office for an interview. Once at the sheriff's office, Mark was placed in interview room 1. I informed Mark he was detained at this point and not free to leave. I then read Mark his Miranda rights warnings verbatim from my agency-issued card. Mark verbally stated he understood his rights. I then asked if he still wanted to speak with me. Mark stated sure. He then stated he was interested as to what would make his life easier, because I'm pretty good and I could talk to you. He then stated he didn't want to waste my time with a long story. He stated he had nothing to hide and would tell the full truth. He then asked what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to speak with him. He then agreed to speak with me. Wow, that was an interesting exchange. After Mark spoke about several different things, Mark then realized he was rambling and asked if I wanted him to skip to what happened during 5th period. I asked him to go ahead and talk about 5th period. Mark then stated the students were comfortable with him and began joking around with him. He also stated he did not know who was bringing charges against him, but assumed there was several that did not like him, did not like what he had to say. He then said there was one young man he was still unwilling at this point to say TE's name, that he threatened to call Mr. Adams, the principal, several times on, but he thought Mark was joking. I then left the room to get Mark something to drink. When I returned, I asked him to use the kid's name if he knew them. He then said my man, TE, was the one that from the moment he walked in the door was high-strung and kept breaking my one rule. He stated he was being a goofball the entire class. He stated the entire class had to be reminded about his rule, but my bud, Mr. TE, broke the rules the entire class. What rule? Mark stated he threatened to call the principal numerous times about TE's behavior, but due to the phone being all the way across the room, he never called. Must be some big classrooms. He stated he did tell TE to go to the office, but TE didn't listen. He then told TE he was disturbing his class and not following his rules, so he wanted him to go to the office. TE ignored him. He then told TE that if he is going to continue being a goofball, he has two options: either sit down and do his work or go outside and sit alone on the bench. TE would go out the door a little way and then come back in. Mark said he told TE, "You are leaving me at wits' end." He then gave TE another ultimatum and told him to go outside or Mr. Adams would be called. TE then left the classroom for 5 to 10 seconds and came right back into the classroom, continued not to follow instructions. Mark then stated at this point, "I probably should have called Mr. Adams, but I didn't because the phone was all the way at the other end of the room, and that's probably an excuse." He then stated the thing that popped in his mind is the same thing that his coaches used to do. He stated if a kid got out of line, they would make the kids hold hands and walk a lap around the gym. Mark decided he would make TE hold hands with another student and walk a lap around the track if he continued to not do what he was told. He then threatened this punishment to either TE or someone else. He demonstrated to me as he did to TE by clasping his own hands together, palm facing palm, fingers not laced. TE did not like the idea of holding hands with another student, but continued to break the rules. Mark explained they refused to hold hands to walk a lap. He then asked somebody else for assistance in controlling the students because she is responsible, I'm guessing a female student. He stated he told someone was too friendly and did not believe he was serious and asked her to have the boys hold hands and walk a lap. He then stated at this point he started losing his temper a little bit. He then started raising his voice until another teacher, redacted, came into the room. She asked Mark if everything was okay. Mark told him no and pointed at TE. TE then somebody yelled at TE to get in line several times. Somebody then began behaving until shortly after the other teacher left the room. Mark stated again that the students had him at wits' end. He then gave TE another ultimatum to either go outside and stay outside, or he was going to call Mr. Adams. TE and someone else walked outside holding hands for 2 to 3 minutes. When the boys returned to the class, they were both carrying dandelions. The boys then walked up to Mark and stuck the dandelions in Mark's face. He then addressed TE first, or somebody else first, and said, "Somebody, please." Somebody then set the weed down and went to his seat. TE continued to put the weed in Mark's face. TE then was face to face with Mark. Mark demonstrated this by clapping his hands together as though two faces were touching one another, like this. Yeah. Mark stated he was not scared, but he did not want TE in his personal space. He then stated he told Penny to give him some space, that he had reached the point where Mr. Adams needed to be involved. Mark then looked at the ceiling and told me he wanted to get this right. He said, "I think he stepped into me. I think he bumped me." Mark then stated, "I barely grabbed him, firmly, but enough, right by the shoulders." He then stated, he said, "TE, stop. Give me space." Mark was demonstrating what he did while he spoke. He had his arms fully extended, looked as though he was holding something in each hand. He then stated, as gently as I could, "Put him right there." As he said this, he turned his upper body towards the right and to the wall. As his hands got close to the wall, he released his grip as if to let go of something. Mark then stated he has heard that TE has a bruise on his back. He then stated, "I would, honest to God, never do anything to hurt him." Mark thought maybe TE bruises softly. Never heard that before. But God works in mysterious ways. He put the bruise there for a reason? I don't know. Mark stated that the episode was over. He thinks he told TE to go to the office. Mark stated he walked away from TE, but TE followed. Mark stated he told TE, this isn't funny anymore, and you're going to make me lose a gasket. You blow a gasket. You don't lose a gasket. Unless you're in NASCAR, and then you could lose anything. I'm already about there. TE then stood right next to Mark. Again, Mark demonstrated the closeness by clapping his hands together. He then stated he asked TE, TE, what do you think your dad or your brother, redacted, would do if this was you? Mark looked as though he was searching for the right words. He continued his statement to TE. What do you think they would do? He then stated he thinks he said, they would kick you in the butt or something. TE thought it was funny, so Mark told him he needs to get away from him or go to the office. TE then got back in Mark's face. Mark again demonstrated this by putting his hands together as if two faces were touching. At first, I backed away. He told TE, TE, this is not funny. If you come at me one more time, I'm going to do what your own dad would do. What I've told you I'm going to do probably 2 or 3 times now. He then stated TE did it again, and he bumped Mark. Mark then demonstrated a kick and stated, I barely did this. And I told him that actions have consequences. I'm not joking around. Mark then stated, I did not kick the young man. I did not strike him. I did it just enough to, and I don't even know if I made contact with you, to be honest. Mark then stated that he, of course, embellished it, and if you've seen any soccer games recently, where especially our international friends take a foul and drop to the floor, he embellished the heck out of it. He stated when TE got back up, he asked if he was okay and then asked him if he needed to go to the nurse. TE stated he was okay and did not need a nurse. Mark asked him several times if he was sure. He then asked TE if he would like to go sit down at his desk and do his work. He thinks TE did just that after a few minutes. Mark stated, I probably made an inappropriate joke, but I was at wits' end. Scary place to be. He stated that within seconds of it happening, he was removed from the classroom. I first commented on TE's behavior. Mark then began speaking about TE's family, how he normally acts, baseball, playing cards, and then stated that TE's mom, Mama Bear, is charging him. He then started guessing what his charges would be. He guessed it would be assault and battery and stated that in reality, it was self-defense. I then cleared the air with Mark by telling him that neither TE nor his parents reported the incident. I then told him that it was the multitude of videos that caused everyone to intervene. Mark stated he saw the video and knows what it is. I then asked Mark if he remembered what he said to TE when he put him into the wall. Mark replied, something about the wrath of God. I then explained TE's injuries. Mark's reply was, God works in mysterious ways. I then asked Mark if he feared for his safety when TE was in his face or was bumping him. Mark looked as though he was thinking intently and said, fear would be a strong word. The only thing I fear is God. He also stated he did not know what TE was going to do, though. Mark then stated, this is going to sound super weird. That's never a good way to start a sentence. He then began explaining somebody's girlfriend took a video that was going to look crazy to the world. Mark stated that just before the second episode with TE, the girl had her phone out and Mark could tell she was recording. The girl then winked at Mark. Mark stated he did not believe the girl was going to use the video against him, but rather for a higher purpose. He then stated, even though I didn't want to do any of the things I did right there, and this is what's going to end me up in a manic hospital probably, because it has all the appearances of a psychotic episode or a manic episode, and then there's a redacted portion. Mark stated he understood this shouldn't have happened, especially not in school, but after he warned TE several times, Mark raised his foot up as if he was going to kick something. He stated, I had a crystal clear moment, and I swear to God and the camera that God said yes. That is what I was supposed to do. I then clarified that God told him that he was supposed to what he was supposed to do. Mark stated, "That's going to get me in some trouble, isn't it?" "Yes, it is." I then asked about TE's behavior again. I told Mark he has described TE as being goofy. Let's rewind for a second. So he just said that he had a crystal clear moment where God told him he was supposed to kick a high school student in the nuts. He is a grown ass adult, and God told him to kick a high school student in the nuts. What the actual. I then asked about TE's behavior again. I told Mark he has described TE as being goofy and silly throughout our interview. Mark stated adjectives I could use would be disruptive, disobedient, goofy. He was being a kid, a teenager, in a public school setting. I asked if he felt as though TE showed any anger or aggression. Mark stated anger, no, aggression, a little. He went on to explain that TE would probably consider him to be a close friend. Right, because high schoolers are close friends with state representatives who are also attorneys and part-time emergency substitute teachers. So he believed TE was acting as he would as a teenager with a close friend or his dad, which is more of what it is, but in a public school setting. I then asked how he felt during fifth hour to describe his adjectives. What are your adjectives? He stated happy, sad, stretched to my limit the more TE was doing. I'm not sure what that says. Exhausted. I was exhausted with what if he exhausted his patience. Mark stated he did not break his patience because he could have not done what he did. I then asked why he did it then. Mark pointed to the ceiling. You know. I then asked him if God told him to put his hands on a child. Mark stated twice. He then described the second episode where the girl winked at him and nodded her head as if to say, "Go do it." He stated he knew it was wrong and he shouldn't do it. He stated he did not want to do it. He stated the whole world is telling me not to do it, but God said yes. Mark believes this was God's plan. I asked Mark what words he used to tell TE what he was going to do to him. Mark stated, I said, TE, I'm going to kick you in the balls or the nuts. And I said it about 3 times over the course of 5 or 10 minutes. I asked him if he said balls or nuts. It's important. He said, I don't know, probably both. He said it multiple times and he was crystal clear as to what I said. He stated he verbally asked TE if he understood that if he got in his face again, he was going to kick him in the balls. He stated, TE stated, yeah. Mark stated when he kicked TE, it was more like sarcasm, not a kick or a strike or anything like that. I have never heard sarcasm used as a reference to a physical action. But TE was putting on a show. Down to the ground he goes. TE then popped back up laughing and thought it was funny. Swear to God on the Bible. The detective broke contact after, and Mark was transported to. I was not able to figure out what FRCO meant. There is a Franklin Adult Detention Facility, Franklin County Adult Detention Facility, but I don't know what the R in those means. No idea. The detective then, the following week, conducted an interview with one of the girls who was present in the class, and her mother was present for the interview. The detective asked her to tell her about the class that day. She said when she arrived to class, Mark was playing music. As the bell rang, Mark told the class, this is going to be the most uncomfortable class of your life. I asked the girl what that meant to her, and she didn't know what it meant. They had spoke about it, asking Mark about the project he was working on. It felt as though TE was attempting to get his work done. She then stated Mark kept pushing and grabbing TE and being very touchy with him. She stated that during this time, during the class, she became annoyed and asked Mark why he was being loud and disruptive. She stated she was sitting down next to someone else when she asked a question to Mark. Mark came over to her, bent over, placed his hands on his knees, and got into her face. And he said something to the effect of, "If I don't do this, do you think they'll get it through their thick skulls?" Mark then got even closer to her face and grabbed her by the shoulders. She stated Mark was not aggressive when he grabbed her. He left no marks or injuries on her person. Mark, while holding her shoulders, asked her, "Do you have mental problems?" He further asked her if she thought of unaliving. I later asked her how she felt when Mark was in her face, and she immediately replied, "Scared." She stated she has, it's later said, PTSD, and does not like people grabbing her. Like, who does? I asked what exactly made her scared, and she stated she thought Mark was going to hurt her. Mark also made reference to those two in the corner, speaking about her and someone else could be making out. It was at this time she was feeling very uncomfortable and asked someone else if they wanted to go for a walk with her, and the two left the room. When they returned, she stated it was quiet. Mark was still speaking about God and the devil. Mark, who was also asking everyone in the room if they thought of unaliving. And shortly after this, the class ended. WTF. As I already noted, Samsel was released pretty quickly after he was detained following this interview because he needed to attend a session at the Capitol. The Democrats openly blasted him for that choice. But at that point in time, not a lot of information had really made it out. This wasn't even a full week after the incident happened. I believe this was before this second interview even took place. And the police report, the videos, all that, they hadn't circulated yet. All anybody knew is that Mark had been arrested for assault, 3 counts of assault on a student. So it was kind of sticky. But before heading to the Capitol, Mark published this video on social media.
A few kids that were scared and probably didn't, I don't even know that they were scared because they were surrounded by their friends and their comfort zone. We were in the art room. Nobody was ever in danger. Did we make it look like we were in anger or outrageous or hurting kids? Yeah, we did. We made it look that way. Not have been outrageous if I hadn't dropped the F-bomb, if I didn't say I'm going to bring the wrath of God on Teresa, then nobody cares. Everyone keeps their head down and keep on going. Altercation's a strong word. There was no altercation. I'm sure there's some 1 or 2 students that probably perceived it as one, but it was exactly as we planned it. That's why I think about resigning every single day. That place sucks. Topeka sucks. And we can speed up and but that place sucks. If you want our country to change and our state to change, quit acting like what you're doing, keyboard warriors. I didn't do anything wrong. The world thinks no, that's not true. I get way more messages of support that aren't blasting me on because they know me. Just like, not for a second. Do I like that it happened? No. Do I like that I used F-bomb or had to take it to that extreme? No, I absolutely do not.
So Mark's first court hearing was rather uneventful, but the buzz had already started, and not surprisingly, he was seeking a plea deal.
They had given a proposal to the state. I'm not sure how much more time they need to think through it or do some things on their end. If it's not too much, their judge, I'm sorry. If it's not too soon, I was going to ask to see if the court has a docket next Monday. I was going to see if this could be set over. If not, I was just going to ask for whenever the next docket is.
Mr. Jones.
Judge, Mr. Scott reached out to me last Friday with a possible plea offer. I informed him that I need to discuss it with the victims, and I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but I'm going to this week try to reach out to them and talk to them, get their input. I think that probably by next Monday we can maybe have a decision on that.
Sure, I can then set it for another status.
I'm available.
Zoom on the 23rd of August at 11:30.
That's fine, Judge.
Okay.
Yep.
Does that work for you, Mr. Samsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Right. Anything else by the state today?
No, thank you, Judge.
Mr. Scott?
No, Judge, thank you.
Right. Thank you. Then I'll set it for another status on the 23rd of August at 11:30 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
A Kansas lawmaker accused of battery on a student while he was substitute teaching is commenting on the alleged incident following his arrest. Kansas District 5 Representative Mark Samsel is under investigation for an alleged incident last week at Wellsville High School. The school and police say they can't release any more information while the investigation continues, but Samsel will not be welcome back to teach anytime soon. Yesterday, the representative shared an incredibly lengthy statement on social media, but only a portion of it touched on last week's incident, and we've shared that full statement on KCTV5.com if you would like to read it.
A lot has happened since this originally took place, which was 3 years ago plus. And KCTV5 has removed all traces of Mark Samsel from their website. But some good guy techie hit that archive button before they took whatever it was down, and now it is forever memorialized in the way back machine, also known as the Internet Archive, for everybody's viewing pleasure. If you are not familiar with the way back machine, I strongly suggest you take it out and do your part in preserving Internet history. It's also useful when you need to look something up from Internet history. So this is from the KCTV website from, I believe it was sometime in 2022, so it would be like a full year after the statement was taken. So I imagine it was right before they were asked to take it down. And this was the story that they ran. Kansas House Representative Mark Samsel issued a statement following battery allegations. This was actually posted just several days after the allegations became public. And this full statement was posted to his Facebook page and, of course, has since been removed. I am truly sorry that this has caused confusion and pain, especially in my native hometown. But this is not about me. It never has been. If it were up to me, I'd be sitting on a beach in Australia or exploring the jungles of Africa. Maybe the beach in San Diego or Portland or Madison remain on my bucket list of places to travel. I mean, those go hand in hand, right? Of course, I'm pretty blue collar, so Melbourne Lake or a Royals game is more my style. But my family has been in Kansas by choice and pro-life. Iron-ick, huh? Yeah, I don't know. Since 1869. I'm not quite that old, but they must have some pretty good character and roots because they voluntarily left amazing places like Indiana and Pennsylvania to come here. Kansas, a free state. Some of us attend church on Sunday, some of us don't, but we are all God-fearing people. In fact, my family voluntarily donated land to establish a beautiful church here in the outskirts of nowhere, somewhere the world will never stop to visit. We prefer it that way because we are busy farming, teaching, hunting, and attending or watching as many sporting events as possible, from youth to high school to college to professional sports. On the world stage, come on World Cup, KC would love to host you with our unbeatable Midwestern hospitality. This is his apology. What happened to Wellsville on Wednesday? Only God knows. I have my version, you have yours. The kids, as we discussed, in each hour before fifth hour, and they're also at the beginning of fifth hour before anything newsworthy occurred, each as theirs. So how do we find the truth? It's probably not be listening to the yellers and the screamers, is it? Yet look at how quickly they get headline news today. They come after everyone. Our educators, our law enforcement, our doctors, our frontline workers, our judges, our court personnel. They attack Christianity while calling for God to be removed from the classroom and canceled and erased from our American history and modern society. It's not going to work, folks. Do you like how the world looks right now? Do you like the skyrocketing divorce rates, the teenage rates? Of course we don't. But how many of us pause to change our own actions? If you attended a 0 Reasons Why meeting lately, You should. The group is amazing, and it's turning the tide on mental health. Any of you volunteered to substitute teach for the kids? It's a financial sacrifice. I did read somewhere that the pay for an emergency substitute teacher was $88 per day. That's rough, for considering what they have to deal with. Our ref middle school or high school sports, to call it both ways, let me tell you, the pay is great. And if you think my behavior in the classroom on Wednesday was inappropriate or even criminal, how about we compare it to your behavior at any given public school or private or homeschool sporting event? Look at how the world treats our children and our referees in those settings. I know because I've reffed countless of them. Ah, that's where the legislation came from. Somebody probably did something to him. Okay. And we are at wits' end. Boy, he likes that saying. I literally had a grandma in the front row holding a baby in Gardner, Texas last week. AAU tournament, shocking they couldn't find any refs who wanted to show up, calling me every four-letter word in the book, and then some, because she was acting out of anger, hostility, and resentment. In those scenarios, we referees are frequently in fear for our safety. Yet that is American society. That has become the normal, and the helpers and the good guys keep showing up so the kids can play. Why? God only knows. Please don't come to Florida. You won't survive. We take our football seriously. I would suggest it's because we love the kids and we love the game so much that we tolerate more abuse than the average American, and dare I say keyboard warrior or yeller or screamer or chicken can fathom. The kids need us. Like Coach Martin said, the kids haven't changed. But boy, has our society and our parenting. It's not good for our young people, folks. I feel like he's got a message in there somewhere, but it's just lost in the word salad. On Sundays, I attend church. I know where I'm going. A church that actually makes sense and uses the Lord's word in a positive manner. I am aware that not all churches necessarily operate this way. I can't change the world, and only Jesus can save me. I am fine. I am saved. I am doing my absolute best to bring national attention to teenage mental health and the prevention of, he loves that word. Folks, I get messages from our young people about every day, maybe every other day, dealing with things I couldn't even imagine when I was a student at Wellsville myself: anxiety, depression, hallucinations, ideation attempts. In our small town, one death deeply hurts our entire community. No more, folks. Step up, do something, change our neighbors, get off our phones and social media. God's country and his people are still incredible. He didn't create skin colors. Humans screwed that up. He didn't create hate, yet look at what we do via social media every single day. As President Lincoln, our beloved nation, founded on God while fully respecting and protecting freedom of religion, we never be brought down from the outside, conservative or liberal, black or white, gay or straight, it makes no difference, folks. He just said that the kid's whole problem was he had two moms. Sorry. In moments of need, Americans rally together to heed the call. One of many, yet, as so many prior American leaders have warned, here we are on the brink of destroying ourselves from within. How many more wake-up signs do we need? Riots at the Capitol, mass shootings, pure evil and hatred. Dear God, enough is enough. I pray the new normal is one based on love and compassion and patience. Is that why he made the kids walk around holding hands? We're back in the 70s, free love. And yes, fearing God Almighty and doing our best to understand and follow his word, the Bible. The 10 Commandments. I pray that Kansas and America returns to a new normal where the laws we, mere mortals, write are consistent with the teachings of Jesus, and that we all do our best to respect one another. We follow and obey the man-made laws that sit well within our own morals and religious beliefs, and when not, we firmly yet grace protest publicly, quietly at first, and then loud if necessary. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Justin Bieber figured it out, and Katy Perry and Blake Shelton and Patrick Mahomes. And what politician? It's hard to find one, isn't it? And yet we keep voting for these folks who do the same things over and over like sheep. Their special interest political parties and wealthy donors Do we really wonder why America is hurting so badly right now? I don't. It's not rocket science. I can't believe I said all that with a straight face. I would suggest Liz Cheney has it figured out. And yet, look how she gets crucified. God bless her, her family, and all of Wyoming for sending her to Washington, D.C. to clean up the mess of perhaps unparalleled proportions. And yet, how many of us have already moved on from the attack by the so-called patriots on our nation's capital? I cried that day. I pray to God every day that we unite as a country to fix it. Yet, I don't see it. No, sadly, it looks like more business and life as usual. Was Wednesday unorthodox? Absolutely. Did I intend to hurt a soul or act for a single moment out of rage, animosity, or any other element of battery? Absolutely not. I, honest to God, love all his children. Except that one, Bobby. He's an asshole. That's what Jesus teaches. And I'm not trying to sound preachy. But how else do you tell the truth and speak about the Bible? I don't know. I'm doing my best, folks. And I am genuinely sorry for any pain or confusion this may cause anyone. But I will put my hand on the Bible right now and swear that I didn't do anything wrong. Those kids are the last people on Earth, the planet. Look at me interjecting. I'm like getting all into it. I would ever do anything to intentionally hurt. I've known most of them for years, some over a decade. Now let's compare that to your actions. I know several kids who care about me deeply, and because the nasty and false, misleading things written by the Kansas City Star and others here on social media, they are hurting. You're hurting the kids. That's not caused by me, folks. Nope, that's you, keyboard warriors. I actually show up at their events, or at least I used to, and I will again after the storm passes because they're parents. And they want me there. They invite me there. Not all of them, but many, most. Most of them invite me there. I can't do anything about the haters. Nope, that's beyond me. But I do listen to T Swift. I shake it off. I shake it off. Shake it off. Sorry, I had to count to 10. I always will. God has me exactly where he needs me. And that scares folks, confuses them. Some of them, anyway. The truth will continue to unfold over the coming days. Remember that patience is a virtue, notwithstanding the efforts of some to convict immediately, some for caring but misguided motives, others for ill motives. Here in American, we are innocent until proven guilty. When there's a video, though, doesn't that prove it right there? For all those worried about me and my mental condition, please put your fears to rest. I am good. Better than okay, but not great. At least I know. Okay, good, great. Okay, somewhere in here. It seems that about the best we can do in this world for anything more than a short period. For all the haters attacking me relentlessly, please stop. Your words are immaterial to me. You don't know me. You don't care to. That's fine. Shake it off. Shake it off. Shake it off. But your words are hurting the young people who are watching and paying attention. I deeply regret that my actions may have caused confusion or sadness among a handful of some young folks. But I only had one rule. They knew what it was, and it was simple. If they broke that rule, I told them the truth. Some of them did lie, deceive, etc., but not the vast majority. And many of them that appeared to knew exactly what they were doing to serve a higher purpose. Mental health for our young people, and even our not so young. I said that every single hour, 1st through 5th, I am beyond tired of attending funerals for our kids. I will scream that from about anywhere. If that upsets you, we probably don't have much to discuss. So perhaps your keyboard is the best place for you. But I would honestly suggest that here are a lot more important uses of both of our time, both yours and mine. Please keep all of the prayers coming for healing, for mental health reform, for criminal justice reform, for the right balance of God to be allowed in our public places and schools, because it's there right now, folks. The proof is in the pudding. I'm off to church. Take care, everyone. Let's go, Royals. Clap, 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 clap. I'm so glad I didn't pre-read that because I don't know if I could have made it through it a second time. What in the bloody hell? That was his apology. That was his apology. That was his apology. Where on this green earth, and if he made me say folks one more time, I was going to. So in September of 2021, Kansas representative, still active, appeared in court to face the 3 counts of misdemeanor battery that he was still facing. A plea deal had been worked out to reduce those charges from battery to disorderly conduct. The court agreed to accept the plea deal and sentenced Samsel to 30 days for each charge. So that would be consecutively and would total 90 days of jail time. However, the Franklin County judge suspended that sentence and instead gave him 12 months of probation. But as part of that deal, he was to have no contact with the victims' families, must issue letters of apologies to each victim, submit to a supervising officer within 30 days to start his probation, and may not use social media on personal accounts. Since he's a public figure, he's allowed to have an official public account, but not a personal platform. And a representative has to maintain the professional accounts. He's not allowed to do it. He was ordered to have a mental health evaluation during his first several court visits, and there was recommendations made during that evaluation, and he was ordered to comply with whatever recommendations were made.
Do you have any comments in regards to this case and sentencing today?
Your Honor, I just want to say I'm sorry for what happened. I never intended to hurt anybody. I appreciate what Mr. Jones and the state has done, my attorney, and also the court. And so I apologize, Your Honor.
So there didn't actually appear to be any direct repercussions to his role as a state representative. Indirectly, I think his reputation was pretty much ruined. But this could also be from his very traditional values and willingness to speak his mind openly. There's only about 44.5% of Kansas that identifies as Republican on their voter applications. I mean, that's not bad, but likely not enough to save him from himself. After he took the House floor in 2021, which was just a month before the incident in question, and he proudly explained the dangers of requiring consent between spouses the same way it's required between non-married parties. There was a prior exception on record that was probably old as dirt. So Samsel showed how increasingly uneducated he was about the topic by opining while on the floor to what does the sanctity of marriage mean? And I'm single, so I'm not the best person to speak to this, but when you do get married, what does that mean? And what implied consent are you giving? I have so many comments on this. Dinglehopper went on to say, imagine after a long, hard day at work, let's say wife or husband is already asleep. And I'm going to interject and say, yeah, probably, because this isn't 1974 and they probably worked all day too. He goes on to whine that waking up a sleeping spouse for your own selfish needs and gratification could be considered a crime. To that I respond, if you can't wake them up in a way that doesn't cross the line into a crime, it really doesn't surprise me that you're single. This guy pushes my buttons. And I said I wasn't going to comment on this, so I apologize and retract my prior statements, and I don't have the energy to go back and edit them out, so just forget that I said them. And Samsel went on to spout a whole bunch of, nope, we have a new word for this. I have it written down, hold on. Baffle garb. You can thank C. Roach for that one. We are going to replace word salad with baffle garb. Now that I made a nice little word salad icon to put on a shirt, now we got to do baffle garb. There was baffle garb about the rights of spouses and whatnot that he was telling everybody, you know, then why get married if I don't have the rights to do this? Then he casted a shameful nay vote. He was one of only 10 men and 3 women to vote against reforming this bill, which passed with overwhelming bipartisan support with 110 votes. So not long after that, August of 2022, he entered the Republican primary again for the 3rd time, and this time he faced off against a Carrie Barth. And at this date and time, Mark had recently received notice that a civil action was being filed against him by one of the parents of the students involved in the prior criminal case. But that was just wrapping up. He was a month shy of completing his probation in the criminal case, which would close everything out. He had had no incidents or anything that would have prolonged his probation, so he was almost done with that part. There was, however, the disciplinary action still pending against him with the Kansas bar that had started, in 2021 when the whole incident started and, drug out for many, many years after that. So regardless of whether it was his ultra-conservative views, his ramblings, or controversial statements, or the substitute incident that tanked his reputation, poor Mark wasn't able to recover. He was defeated by Carrie Barth 63.5 to a pitiful 36.5. Then Carrie went on to win the entire district seat unopposed, 100% for Carrie. She was actually reelected this past November with 68.5% of the vote. Since in the prior disciplinary hearing that had a published opinion, a large portion of the opinion was actually a recap of the disciplinary panel's findings, which actually occurred prior to the hearing with the Supreme Court. So in order to keep things chronological, I'm going to read you the findings of fact that the petitioner and the respondent stipulate to and agree that the respondent engaged in, which is part of the investigation by the disciplinary panel or the disciplinary administrator or whatever it's called that's all super secret and I can't find any trace of. So we begin on April 28th, 2021, respondent Mark Samsel, substitute taught an art class at Wellsville High School. The respondent, when working as an attorney and a state representative, had also obtained his emergency substitute teaching license on May 12th, 2020 to make $88 and waste a whole day. I don't understand that. Maybe God told him to do it. That's probably what it is. During his 5th hour art class, respondent started the class by playing music as the students entered the classroom and telling the students that he had the floor unless someone else raised their hand and was recognized, and that it was going to be the most uncomfortable class of their life. He then proceeded to do many things throughout the class period that made some students uncomfortable. Respondent talked about God, the devil, unaliving, and mental health. He told the class that God was speaking through him. Some students later reported feeling uncomfortable to the point that some of them left the classroom for a break. Respondent seemed focused on one student in particular, T.E. Respondent acknowledges this and states that he had known T.E. for many years. Respondent stated T.E. was disrupting the classroom without being recognized and repeatedly disregarding respondent's requests, including to leave the classroom and calm down or go to the principal's office. At one point, respondent grabbed T.E. from behind and lifted him up. During the class period, respondent also pushed T.E. against the wall. T.E. reported this caused him to get a mark on his back. Respondent also kicked or kneed T.E. in the groin area. T.E. laid on the ground after respondent kicked him. Respondent asked T.E. if he was hurt and told T.E. he could go to the nurse and have her check it for him. Respondent also told D.W., a classmate, he could check T.E.'s nuts for him. D's nuts. In an interview with law enforcement, T.E. stated that respondent grabbed him by the shoulders and shoved him against the wall. T.E. stated he did not want to be touched and was scared by what had happened. He stated that about 10 minutes later, respondent approached him and told him he was going to kick him in the balls. T.E. stated that another 10 minutes went by and the respondent kicked T.E. in the groin with his right foot. T.E. winced over in pain and felt confused. J.G. stated that during the class period, the respondent bent over and grabbed J.G. by the shoulders, asking her whether she had mental health problems. J.G. stated she felt scared because she had PTSD and did not like people grabbing her. She thought respondent was going to hurt her. While the class period progressed, one of the students texted her mom, who was a teacher at the middle school. She stated respondent was crazy and that he had just hardcore kicked TE in the balls. Even though the student's mom was teaching, she alerted administration. As part of the investigation, law enforcement interviewed respondent the following day, April 29th, 2021. Respondent advised law enforcement he believed it was his mission from God to save kids from unaliving. He identified numerous kids he believed to be struggling with anxiety and depression. Respondent demonstrated he had barely grabbed TE by the shoulders, told him to stop, and then let go when TE got close to the wall. Respondent stated he heard TE had a bruise, opined that TE bruises softly, but that God works in mysterious ways. He told law enforcement, even though I didn't want to do any of the things I did right there, and this is what's going to end me up in a manic hospital probably, because it has all the appearances of a psychotic episode or a manic episode, and I know because I did have them in the past, but I went through doctors, and I've been healthy for, probably almost a full year now. Respondent explained he had crystal clear moment and believed God was telling him what he was supposed to do. He believed God told him twice that he could act physically towards TE. Law enforcement arrested respondent and he was charged with 3 counts of misdemeanor battery. All 3 Class B person misdemeanors. The criminal complaint listed the victims of the batteries as TE 2 counts and JG. Both victims were minors. Following the incident in the classroom, respondent posted a story on Snapchat stating the entire incident was planned to send a message about mental health and teenage unaliving. The message stated that God planned it and that many of the kids were in on it. However, according to interviews conducted by law enforcement, none of the students interviewed knew anything about the plan and staged the event ahead of time. On May 24th, 2021, respondent emailed the Office of the Disciplinary Administrator, the ODA, advising the ODA that he had been formally charged with 3 counts of misdemeanor battery. That is the office that has the panel that does the review prior to this hearing. The respondent pled guilty on September 13th, 2021 to an amended complaint that contained 3 counts of disorderly conduct, all Class C person misdemeanors. On the same day, the district court placed respondent on 12 months probation with a 90-day underlying sentence. As conditions of probation, respondent could not have contact with the victims and had to write them apology letters. He was also ordered to comply with mental health treatment and had to take all prescribed medications. In respondent's response, dated October 29th, 2021, he stated he was suffering from a manic episode with psychotic effects and a break from reality in the classroom caused by stress, agitation, and the pressure of both the events leading up to that day in the classroom and the day of. Due to this, he believed he was supposed to stage an outrageous event to bring attention to mental health, especially for kids. He continued, after asking the student to stop several times and even backing away from him, the agitation and stress continued and created a grandiose scheme in my mind that I, working along with the kids, was supposed to stage an outrageous event to bring attention to mental health, especially for the kids. But I told the student exactly what I was going to do before I did anything. And then he continued to step at me, to push me in the chest again, and my mind interpreted all of this as part of the grandiose plan. During an interview with Mr. Tom Stratton, former director of investigations with the ODA in April of 2022, respondent advised that he had been in a manic bipolar state for a few days before April 28th, 2021, and for a few months after. Respondent successfully completed probation in his Franklin County criminal case in September 13th of 2022. TE, through his father, filed a civil case against respondent, the Board of Education for the Unified School District of Franklin County, and Morgan Hunter Corporation. I'm assuming that's the corporation that handles the substitutes. Generally, there's an outside party that coordinates the substitutes. It's an agency, kind of like a temp agency would coordinate temporary employees, in my experience in Florida. The case was filed in Franklin County District Court case number FR 2022 CV 000039. The case settled around September 2023, and no documents or admissions were filed as part of the settlement agreement. The terms of the settlement were confidential and not known to ODA. The respondent obtained an emergency substitute teaching license on May 12, 2020. I still would love to know what triggered him to do that. Perhaps perhaps he was called upon to serve the kids. Based on the foregoing incident that had occurred on April 28th, 2021, Dr. That could be Michael, that could be Miss Kel, Miller, director of the Kansas State Department of Education's teacher licensure and accreditation team, filed a complaint with the Kansas State Board of Education's Professional Practices Commission, alleging that respondent had engaged in professional misconduct. The complaint from the Kansas State Department of Education was dated June 15, 2021. The filing of the KSDE complaint triggered administrative proceedings. These administrative proceedings are investigated and prosecuted by KSDE. Scott Gordon serves as counsel for KSDE. The Kansas State Board of Education, KSBE, acts as the decision maker regarding the license. Respondent entered his appearance as counsel on behalf of himself and requested a hearing. Respondent also filed a request for discovery, request for settlement, and request to dismiss the complaint. The date on the certificate of service for these requests was July 5th, 2021. None of the motions were on his Kansas State legislative representative letterhead. On July 20th, 2021, during a pre-hearing conference, certain deadlines in the administrative proceeding were set, in addition to the date and time of the hearing. That same afternoon or shortly thereafter, Gordon and respondent spoke via phone. Gordon reported that he advised respondent that his client's position was that respondent's misconduct was severe enough that it was not appropriate for respondent to remain licensed as a teacher. I'm curious as to what his actual license was, because before it said emergency substitute. And generally there's requirements for a substitute, and I'm wondering if they lessened those requirements for an emergency substitute. Although he would qualify, he has degrees. Interesting. Gordon reported that he also explained that he represented the Kansas State Department of Education as the complainant, and that it was the Kansas State Board of Education that would make a determination regarding his license. Gordon stated that respondents seemed to understand the distinction and appreciated the clarification on the relationship between his client and the board. A little over a week later, on July 30th, 2021, respondent sent an email to Gordon, Commissioner of Education Dr. Randy Watson, and Dr. Miller. As the Commissioner of Education, Dr. Watson was the appointed Chief Administrative Officer over the Kansas State Department of Education. Dr. Watson and Dr. Miller are the employees of Gordon's client, the KSDE, the investigative and prosecution entity. The body of the email stated, please find attached a letter for your consideration. It was signed Mark A. Samsel, Samsel Law, LLC, with his law firm's logo. Attached to the email was a letter on respondent's legislative letterhead. At the top of the letterhead stated, State of Kansas House of Representatives with Mark Samsel and 5th District. The subject line was Kansas Emergency Substitute Teaching License and Renewal. In his letter, respondent welcomed an opportunity to speak with the three of them in person, noting that Gordon expressed that KSDE might not be interested in such a meeting. So I don't want to seem as though I'm undercutting him. However, I also know we must work together, including in the Kansas Legislature and House Education Committee. Emphasis added. He continued, either way, I pray this letter sheds some light on what transpired and may help lead all of us to work collaboratively for a positive change in Kansas, hopefully to a day where we can again lead the nation in mental health services and education, as, Oswatomi State Hospital proudly did over a century ago. Respondent's 11-page letter, detailed his personal mental health struggles. He stated that he shared the information about his mental health, not asking for sympathy, but for perspective and the reason he believed God had called him to shed light on mental health issues. He continued, in my frequent work in this area, it is partly why we focus on the whole child. If we work together in this moment, I genuinely believe we can bring so much good to Kansas and the world. Respondent referenced his legislative work through the letter. Following a paragraph about his mental health, he stated, I hope you will thoroughly consider the surrounding circumstances. Those days, both before and after the incident, are the most stressful of the entire legislative session. By way of example, on April 8th, 2021, I forcefully opposed Senate Bill 55th, Senate Bill 55, which Governor Laura Kelly described as sending a devastating message to children and their families who were already at a higher risk of bullying, discrimination, and unaliving. I publicly, in a speech and vote, took a powerful position in support of our kids, LGBT community, and mental health. This truth was of no concern to those controlling the media channels. After asking whether KSDE had a policy involving mental health or other conditions, respondent requested that KSDE to give serious consideration to the public policy questions of great importance. As I noted above, it is difficult to accept that a single incident of mental health injury should warrant a permanent lifelong sanction and ban. My concern is amplified considering my long-standing commitment and record of supporting the very things for which KSDE stands, namely the kids and our public educators, at times working alongside Deputy Commissioner Dale Dennis. He concluded the letter by stating, "Given the circumstances, I genuinely would like to work with KSDE to promote our common and shared goals rather than remain in an adversarial position." Respondent voluntarily surrendered his substitute teaching license on August 3rd, 2021, and the board accepted the voluntary surrender. Gordon, who again is counsel for the Education Board, filed a complaint with the ODA, which it received on August 19th, 2021, related to the letter outlined above. Respondent responded to the complaint on September 16th, 2021. He noted in his response that he surrendered his substitute teaching license on his legislative letterhead and generally denied any wrongdoing. Conclusions of law. Petitioner and respondent stipulate and agree that respondent violated the following Kansas Rules of Professional Conduct. KRPC 8.4b, misconduct, criminal act reflecting adversely on fitness, G, misconduct reflecting adversely on fitness to practice law, and E, misconduct, ability to influence improperly. Applicable aggravating and mitigating circumstances, the petitioner and respondent stipulate and agree the following aggravating and mitigating factors apply. Aggravating circumstances, multiple offenses. Respondent violated 3 different Kansas Rules of Professional Conduct. Vulnerability of victims. 2 recognized ABA subparts are relevant. 1, the victims were high school children, and 2, respondent had a fiduciary duty to the students he was substitute teaching. There was an unequal power relationship. Respondent was initially charged with 3 counts of battery against 2 high school students, but later pled to 3 counts of disorderly conduct. Both the high school students were minors. Respondent was the only adult in the classroom of the high school students and was responsible for the classroom as the substitute teacher. Illegal conduct. Respondent was charged with 3 counts of misdemeanor battery, which later pled down to 3 counts of disorderly conduct. Class C, non-person misdemeanors. Franklin County District Court sentenced respondent to 90 days underlying and 12 months probation. Respondent successfully discharged after serving 1 year of probation. Mitigating circumstances. Absence of a prior disciplinary record. Respondent has been an active member of the Kansas Bar and in good standing since September 10th, 2010, with no prior instances of professional misconduct. Absence of dishonest or selfish motive. Evidence shows respondent was suffering from undiagnosed bipolar disorder at the time of the incidents, and there was no evidence to suggest he had dishonest or selfish motives. He indicated that it was diagnosed. He had had an episode the year before that was treated. Anyways, past and present attitude of the attorney as shown by his cooperation during the proceedings and his full and free acknowledgement of the transgressions. Evidence as follows. Again, it's interesting. Respondent self-reported the April 28th, 2021 incident and has been fully cooperative with the disciplinary process. In 2018, and prior to the incidents giving rise to professional misconduct, respondent had voluntarily sought treatment for unknown mental health problems, later determined to be bipolar disorder, and fully cooperated with medical providers. Prior to the instances giving rise to the professional misconduct, respondent had no knowledge of the predominant mental defect, bipolar disorder, or its manic or psychotic symptoms underlying or causing the professional misconduct. Prior to the instances giving rise to the professional misconduct, respondent had sought help and cooperated with KALAP, a pattern which has continued. Respondent has consistently sought help from Dr. Lambert since 2018, and aside from the time frame which underlies the professional misconduct in which respondent was suffering severe prolonged manic and psychotic effects, he has relied on and followed his doctor's recommendations. Respondent has worked with KALAP Monitor since April 2023. Previous good character and reputation in the community, including any letters from clients, friends, lawyers, in support of character and general reputation of the attorney. Respondent was a Missouri Valley College outstanding alumni in 2015, and he had previously made partner at Lathrop and Gage. Mental disability or chemical dependency, including alcoholism or drug abuse, when there is medical evidence that the respondent is affected by a mental disability. On October 2nd, 2023, respondent's psychiatrist doctor provided a written report indicating respondent had been under his constant care and treatment since August 7th, 2018. The doctor stated he was aware of respondent's active disciplinary matters as a licensed attorney, including those matters pertaining to the events on April 28th, 2021 and July 30th, 2021. I think July 30th was when the letter was written. Doctor indicates that his letter is intended to address certain specific issues that pertain to the disciplinary matters and provide his professional opinion regarding respondent's mental health during the time frame that includes those course of events. First, doctor opines that respondent is affected by mental disability bipolar affective disorder type 1. Prior to March 2021, doctor notes that he treated respondent principally for depression, anxiety, and insomnia, but had also diagnosed respondent with unspecified mood disorder. Doctor further indicates that he discussed with respondent the possibility that he may have bipolar disorder, but that respondent had yet to demonstrate a clear period of hypomania or mania to justify a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Beginning in March 2021, doctor reports that he began receiving information from collateral sources describing symptoms that raised concern that respondent was experiencing a manic episode. Toward the late March 2021, doctor described additional reports from collateral sources of changes in respondent's behavior that were atypical of respondent and most notably impulsive spending. Very quickly, I want to discuss what exactly a manic episode is because a lot of people don't really realize what it entails. And in order to be diagnosed as bipolar type 1, you have to have at least one manic episode in your lifetime. So this is from the DSM-5, which is considered the Bible of psychology, pretty much. A manic episode is a distinct period of abnormally or persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and abnormally or persistently increased goal-directed activity or energy lasting at least 1 week and present most of the day, nearly every day, or any duration of hospitalization is necessary. During the period of mood disturbance, an increased energy and activity, 3 or more of the following symptoms, 4 or if the mood is only irritable, are present to a significant degree and represent a noticeable change from the usual behavior. So these are the main symptoms that are present for it to be a manic episode. An inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, feels rested after only 3 hours, is back up, ready to go again, more talkative than usual or pressure to keep talking, flight of ideas or subjective experience, thoughts are racing, distractibility, attention too easily drawn to unimportant or irrelevant external stimuli as reported or observed, increase in goal-directed activity, either socially, at work, at school, or sexually, or psychomotor agitation, purposeless, non-goal directed activity. This is one of the big ones that in my experience is usually looked for, is the excessive involvement in activities that are considered to have a high potential for painful consequences is the terminology that's used. Basically risky activities. And they use, for example, engaging in unrestrained buying sprees, sexual indiscretions, or foolish business investments, gambling, experimenting with drugs, doing things that will get you in trouble and will have major consequences on your life, things that are very out of character. So the mood disturbance is sufficiently severe to cause a marked impairment in social or occupational functioning and to necessitate hospitalization to prevent harm to self or others. And there are psychotic features. The episode is not attributable to the psychological effects of a substance, drug abuse and medication or other treatment, or to another medical condition. On April 2nd, 2021, doctor notes that he visited with respondent who downplayed his concerns. Respondent reported a few symptoms potentially consistent with mania, but most notably irritability and a decreased need for sleep, but also reported that the symptoms lasted only a couple days, occurring during an increased period of stress at the legislature, and doctor reports that they discussed the possibility of manic symptoms and the potential need for treatment changes. Then in late April 2021, doctor notes that respondent's family phoned in reporting worsening of respondent's condition and a desire for him to be seen at a psychiatric facility with concerns about his state of mind. The mental disability caused the misconduct. On April 29th, 2021, doctor reports that he spoke with respondent, which was the day after respondent's incident while substitute teaching on April 28th, 2021. During the phone call, doctor reports the respondent demonstrated no insight into his condition, which doctor states that he attempted to explain to respondent is often a significant problem during a manic episode. By definition, without significant insight, patients are effectively unaware of an active mental health change, decline, or the need for treatment. During the April 29th, 2021 visit, doctor states that respondent's lack of insight was most evident when respondent informed doctor he could not understand why others around him might think he was experiencing mania, but felt he was fine and did not need treatment. Over the next few days, doctor received continued reports from respondent's family and friends over concerns about respondent's mental health and erratic behavior, including statements and actions that were categorically bizarre for respondent. During a telehealth visit on May 4th, 2021, while accompanied by another state legislator, doctor reports that respondent explicitly exhibited mania with psychosis during the visit, such as identifying divine province as the explanation for the incident on April 28th, 2021. Doctor recommended that respondent immediately present for a psychiatric evaluation, hospitalization, and initiation of medication treatment for mania with psychosis. Doctor notes that respondent expressed appreciation for doctor's concern, but respondent's lack of insight and impaired reasoning and judgment led respondent to defer treatment. On May 11th, 2021, doctor states he met with respondent again, but respondent continued to display lack of decision-making capacity by deferring medication treatment and denying authorization for doctor to speak with family members about his condition and treatment. Respondent's family had continued to report behavior and statements consistent with ongoing manic episode and hope to pursue involuntary hospitalization or other measures. Second, doctor opines that during the time of the events in question, predominantly on April 28th, 2021, and thereafter, respondent was experiencing a manic episode with psychotic symptoms, most notably grandiose delusions. In doctor's opinion, respondent's misconduct as well as other conduct over the course of time occurred because he was experiencing severe, prolonged manic symptoms as well as delusional grandiosity. Doctor concludes that, in other words, respondent's mental disability caused the misconduct. According to doctor's opinion, due to the disabling mental health condition, respondent did not recognize that he was experiencing manic or psychotic symptoms and was unable to understand the nature of his action during those symptomatic periods and potential consequences of those actions. Respondent's recovery from mental disability is demonstrated by a meaningful and sustained period of successful rehabilitation. Third, doctor opines that respondent's recovery from the mental disability is demonstrated by a meaningful and sustained period of successful remission of symptoms. After May 11th, 2021, doctor reports that respondent had several appointments with him, during which the manic symptoms began to improve. Doctor indicates that respondent regained some degree of insight and started medication treatment in September 2021. Doctor reports that although the manic episode and related psychotic symptoms eventually resolved, respondent began to experience a depressive episode as part of the bipolar disorder. Doctor notes that respondent continued to experience impairment caused by the bipolar disorder until he started the medication lithium on February 16, 2022, after other medication treatments proved ineffective. Since February 16, 2022, doctor reports respondent has responded well to the prescribed treatment and has demonstrated a meaningful and sustained period of successful remission of symptoms. Rehabilitation would not be the appropriate psychiatric medical term in this context, as no chemical dependency was ever involved. Recovery arrested the misconduct, and reoccurrence of that misconduct is unlikely. Fourth and finally, doctor opines that respondent's recovery has arrested and the misconduct and reoccurrence of any misconduct is unlikely. Doctor notes that the treatment has proven effective to achieve remission of bipolar symptoms. Doctor observes that, in other words, respondent has not experienced any periods of depression or mania since starting lithium. Doctor further opines that a recurrence of the underlying misconduct is unlikely for two primary reasons. First, respondent has experienced a clearly beneficial and sustained response to lithium, which doctor anticipates will continue. Second, having now experienced severe manic symptoms and psychosis and being aware of his diagnosis condition, respondent is much more aware of his need for ongoing treatment for bipolar and more receptive to treatment changes as needed. Imposition of other penalties and sanctions. Franklin County Case FR 2021 CR 000121 and Franklin County Case 2022 CV 39. The Franklin County Attorney's Office filed charges against respondent May 17, 2021. The complainant charged respondent with 3 misdemeanor counts of battery, naming 2 of the high school students as victims. Franklin County Attorney's Office amended the complaint September 15, 2021, and charged respondent with 3 counts of disorderly conduct, which respondent pled to. Respondent was placed on 12 months probation with court services, which he successfully completed on September 13, 2022. TE, through his father CE, filed a civil suit on April 27, 2022. We know all this, and the suit settled. We don't know the cause. Remorse. Respondent apologized to the 2 high school students. Further, after remission of the bipolar symptoms, publicly apologized, including an interview and lengthy article published by the Kansas City Star. The apology included a transparent account of his mental health. Recommendation for discipline. Petitioner and respondent stipulate and agree to the following discipline should be imposed. A period of suspension of respondent's license to practice law for a period of 12 months stayed and placement on 12 months probation. Probation would be subject to the terms and conditions of respondent's plan and probation with the KLAP monitoring agreement, which are incorporated herein for reference. Terms and conditions of the 12 months probation shall include compliance with the rules of professional conduct. Respondent shall not engage in conduct that violates the rules of professional conduct. Receipt of a complaint by the Office of Disciplinary Administrator during the probation term alleging respondent has violated the rules of professional conduct does not in itself constitute a violation of terms of probation, and in the event that ODA receives a complaint during respondent's participation in the program or otherwise opens and commences a disciplinary investigation, the term of the probation shall be extended until such charge has been investigated and a determination made by ODA or regional disciplinary committee regarding disposition of the matter. Mental health treatment. Respondent has been under the care of a clinician already at the time of the inception of the probation. Respondent will comply with that treatment recommendations prescribed by Dr. Garrett Lambert, MD. Respondent shall remain under the care of Dr. Lambert for treatment of bipolar 1 disorder and any other mental health issues that are identified throughout the term of his probation. Respondent shall comply with any counseling or medication directives given by the treatment provider. Respondent shall sign releases so any records can be provided to the disciplinary administrator's office and to his KLAP monitor at the time. Respondent will provide documentation confirming his compliance with the treatment recommendations as directed by the assigned deputy disciplinary administrator. Prior to any change of treatment providers, respondent shall obtain the approval of his KLAP monitor and director of KLAP. Voluntary KLAP monitoring agreement. Respondent has been monitored by Calvin Cal Williams since April 28, 2023, and Calvin Cal Williams is a full-time lawyer in private practice in the Salina, Kansas, and has practiced law for 45 years. He graduated from the Washburn Law School in 1978. Although the monitoring agreement is effective through April 2024, respondent agrees that it will be effective throughout the duration of his probation in this disciplinary matter. Respondent agrees to use alcohol in a moderate and legal manner and to take medications only as prescribed and to comply with the directions of the prescribing health professional. Respondent agreed to report to the director of KLAP and to the monitor any indices of failure to abide by any provision of the agreement. Respondent agreed to meet with the monitor monthly or as otherwise directed by the monitor throughout the duration of the agreement. Respondent agreed to continue therapy with Dr. Lambert as he deems appropriate and necessary. Respondent agreed to not discontinue therapy without first consulting both the doctor and the KLAP program director. As part of the probation plan, respondent agrees to continue therapy with Dr. Lambert throughout the duration of probation. Respondent agreed to continue medication management with his current prescribing physician and to follow recommendations. Respondent agreed to release of information to the director of KLAP for his monitor to make written and oral reports regarding respondent's compliance and non-compliance. Respondent agreed to daily regimen of self-care as outlined in the monitoring agreement. Respondent shall deliver a copy of the probation plan to KLAP. Should the monitor discover any violations of the Kansas Rules of Professional Conduct, he shall include such information in a report to the Disciplinary Administrator's Office in order for the Disciplinary Administrator's Office to investigate these violations. Standard terms. Respondent shall attend any scheduled meetings with the Office of the Disciplinary Administrator and meet any deadlines set by the Office of the Disciplinary Administrator. Respondent certifies he has read and is familiar with his obligations under the Kansas Rules of Professional Conduct. Respondent shall not violate the provisions of his probation or the Kansas Rules of Professional Conduct. In the event respondent violates any of the terms of his probation or any terms of the Kansas Rules of Professional Conduct, can't we start abbreviating at this point? I mean, how many times do we have to say it? Please don't play some game where you take a shot every time I say that, because I don't want to be responsible for drunk people. During the probationary period, respondent shall immediately report such violations to the disciplinary administrator. The KLAP monitor shall be acting as an agent and volunteer of court while monitoring respondent and is afforded all immunities by Supreme Court Rule 233J. Respondent shall continue to cooperate with the disciplinary administrator's office. If the disciplinary administrator requires any further information, respondent shall timely provide information. Respondent shall pay the cost in the amount to be certified by the disciplinary administrator's office. Additional stipulations agreed by the petitioner and respondent. I will give you my firstborn child. Respondent waives his right to a hearing on the formal complaint as provided in Supreme Court Rule 233b-4. The parties agree no exceptions to the findings of fact and conclusions of law will be taken. Pursuant to Supreme Court Rule 233d, a copy of this summary submission agreement will be provided to complainant Scott Gordon. Gordon will have 21 days to provide the disciplinary administrator with his position regarding the agreement. A copy of this summary submission agreement, along with a copy of the complainant's position, will be forwarded to the chair of the board for the discipline of attorneys for his review under Supreme Court Rule 223E. The parties understand and agree that if the summary submission agreement is rejected by the board chair, this matter shall proceed to a disciplinary hearing pursuant to Supreme Court Rule 222. The parties agree that if the summary submission agreement is approved by the board chair, the hearing on the formal complaint will be canceled and the case will be docketed with the Supreme Court under Supreme Court Rule 228. The parties will be required to appear before the Supreme Court for oral argument. Respondent understands and agrees that pursuant to Supreme Court Rule 223F, this summary submission agreement is advisory only and does not prevent the Supreme Court from making its own conclusions regarding rule violations or imposing discipline greater or lesser than the parties' recommendations. The parties agree that the exchange of execution of copies of this agreement by electronic transmission shall constitute effective execution and delivery of the agreement, and the copies may be used in lieu of the original, and the signatures shall be deemed to be original signatures. The end.
We'll now call 127-197 in the matter of Mark A. Sampson.
May it please the court, Matt Vogelsberg appearing on behalf of the Disciplinary Administrator's Office. Madam Chief Justice, I'd like to request 2 minutes for rebuttal. Thank you. This is an original action in attorney discipline involving the respondent Mark A. Samsel. Mr. Samsel was admitted to the Kansas bar in 2010. On October 31st of 2023, the ODA filed a formal disciplinary complaint concerning 2 matters, DA 13-711 and DA 13-748. On November 9th, Mr. Samsel filed a timely answer, admitting to most of the allegations contained in the formal complaint. Thereafter, the parties decided to forego a disciplinary hearing and instead enter into a summary submission agreement on December 7th of 2023, pursuant to Supreme Court Rule 223. Parties have stipulated that Mr. Samsel's actions violated KRPC 8.4B, committing a criminal act that reflects adversely on a lawyer's fitness, 8.4G, engaging in other conduct that adversely reflects on a lawyer's fitness to practice law, and 8.4E, stating or implying an ability to influence improperly a government agency or official. Because the parties have entered into a summary submission agreement,
Can I ask about those violations real quick? I might get them out of order, but B, E, and G were under 8.4. One covers criminal act, which is the conduct that was pled to in this case. One covers influencing government agency, which is the letter to the Department of Education attorney. And then I can't remember, is it G or E? I get them confused. G, that's any other conduct that adversely reflects on fitness. I'm just wondering, in interpreting that rule, the any other conduct, does that, it seems to me that we could interpret that as any conduct that's not actually covered in B and E. So if it is covered in B and E, G arguably would not apply. Do you know what I mean? Because of that other conduct language, or am I how would you respond to that interpretation of the rule?
My understanding from talking to Deputy Disciplinary Administrator both, and then also looking at Mr. Samsel's answer, that the 8.4 B and G violations related to the first complaint, DA 13711, and then obviously the E violation, improperly influence, was the letter, the second complaint. The theory was how we were proceeding was the B was related to the convictions, and then G was related to the other conduct in the classroom that may not have arose to a level of criminal conduct, but still reflected adversely on his fitness to practice law.
Okay, so you're not necessarily arguing that's not an improper way to interpret the rule, but that the evidence actually fits that there is other conduct.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
I was going to go into just because the parties we've entered into the agreement, the primary issue before the court is whether the court agrees with the recommended sanction of a stayed 1-year suspension and then placing Mr. Samsel on probation for 1 year. In order to give some context to the rule violations and the recommended sanction, I would like to give a brief summary of the facts. It's important to note that when respondent engaged in the conduct underlying both of these complaints, he was serving in the Kansas House as a state representative for the 5th House District. In the first complaint, DA 13711, involved an incident that occurred on April 28th of 2021. On that date, Mr. Samsel was working as a substitute teacher at Wellsville High School in an art class. And while suffering from what his psychiatrist later described as a manic episode with psychotic symptoms related to a then undiagnosed bipolar disorder, Mr. Samsel caused a scene in the classroom when he told students that, quote, that he had the floor and that the class was going to, quote, be the most uncomfortable class of their life. Mr. Samsel proceeded to tell the class that God was speaking through him and then spoke about the God, devil, suicide, mental health with the art class. T, who was a student in Mr. Samsel's class, Mr. Samsel believed that T was being disruptive. And at one point, Mr. Samsel grabbed T from behind and picked him up. Later, he shoved T into a wall. And at a later point, Mr. Samsel told T that he was going to kick him, quote, in the balls. And then shortly thereafter, kicked T in the groin area. After kicking T, he told another student in the classroom, quote, check T's nuts for him. Mr. Samsel grabbed another student, JG, by the shoulders and asked her whether she had mental health problems. Mr. Samsel's actions caused JG to believe that Mr. Samsel was going to hurt her. The situation Mr. Samsel created made several students uncomfortable, causing them to leave the classroom while this was going on. Mr. Samsel was arrested by law enforcement the next day. He was ultimately charged with 3 counts of misdemeanor battery. On September 13th of 2021, Mr. Samsel pled guilty to 3 amended charges of disorderly conduct, all Class C non-person misdemeanors. He received 12 months of probation with an underlying 90-day jail sentence, and he successfully completed his criminal probation. Parties agree that Mr. Samsel's conduct relating to the classroom incident violated 8.4B and 8.4G. The second complaint, DA 13748, concerns Mr. Samsel's actions in responding to the Kansas State Department of Education's attempt to have his emergency substitute teaching license revoked due to those actions in the classroom. On June 15th of 2021, Dr. Michelle Miller, director of the Kansas State Department of Education's Teacher Licensure and Accreditation Team, filed a complaint to initiate proceedings with the State Board of Education to revoke Mr. Samsel's substitute teaching license. Attorney Scott Gordon represented the Department of Education in the matter. Mr. Samsel represented himself. On July 30th of 2021, Mr. Samsel emailed a letter to Mr. Gordon and two constituents of the Department of Education, Dr. Randy Watson, the Commissioner of Education, and Dr. Miller, the aforementioned Director of Teacher Licensure and the Accreditation Team. The letter Mr. Samsel sent to the three individuals was significant because despite the licensure matter having nothing to do with Mr. Samsel's service as a state legislator, the letter was written on his legislative letterhead. Throughout the letter, Mr. Samsel referred to his work as a legislator and implied that based on his status as a legislator, the Department of Education should consider working with him rather than taking an adversarial position against him regarding his substitute teaching license. Ultimately, the respondent stipulated that this conduct violated 8.4E, implying an ability to influence properly a government agency or official. The ODA believes that the recommended sanction of 12 months of probation is appropriate, given that Mr. Samsel's conduct, while serious, was caused by him suffering from bipolar disorder, and that the probation plan is designed to ensure that Mr. Samsel continues to receive treatment for his mental health that, according to his treating psychiatrist, since February 16th of 2022 has been successful in keeping the symptoms of his bipolar disorder in remission.
Counsel, can I stop you and ask you a couple questions about what you were just describing? And I think you said a direct quote from the summary submission, which I think is little I2 in the mitigating factors on page 15. It starts at the bottom of page 15. The mental disability caused the misconduct. And then there are a number of paragraphs that recite the substance of the doctor's testimony, or maybe it wasn't testimony, but statement.
A letter, and it's Exhibit A.
Okay. My question really goes to all of this, but it strikes me that the bulk of this, if not the entirety of it, is describing the causal connection between the mental health of the respondent and the April 28 incident. But I'm having a hard time seeing the connection between the mental health state of the respondent and the second complaint. Can you help me or maybe walk through that? Because even just the underlying facts don't strike me as conduct that is typically associated with a bipolar mental state.
In Exhibit A, which is Dr. Garrett Lambert, who's the treating physician, he explains that the manic phase that Mr. Sam was going through was still taking place as of July 30th of 2021 when the letter was written. And also included in his letter was noting that as part of this manic episode that Mr. Samsel was experiencing, I think, and I might be incorrectly paraphrasing, but the doctor said that the manic symptoms also, Samsel as a result displayed delusions of grandeur, and so I would argue that those symptoms may have resulted in the self-importance that was shown in the letter that was written to the.
But self-importance is not that's not really what the violation alleges that he was bringing undue and inappropriate pressure to bear on KDH, the Department of Education. Is that right?
Yes.
That actually strikes me as a very rational, calculated effort to use one's position of influence to reduce possible consequences, not as something that's influenced by delusions. It doesn't strike me as delusional at all. I'm just trying to connect those dots. That's
maybe the decision to write such a letter was that because of his bipolarism, he was more amenable to making that decision. The legislative letterhead and to refer numerous times to his actions as a legislature to benefit. That would be That would be my best explanation for that.
Counsel, do you have any more, do we have a more current medical assessment than Exhibit A dated October 2023? And I'm just,
We do not from Dr. Lambert.
anybody, I'm just trying to get the medical
Right.
side of this thing. Or at least, I guess maybe what I'm trying to do is get the compliance with the medical regimen.
Right. Part of his KLAP monitoring agreement includes routinely seeing Dr. Lambert. I just spoke to Cal Williams, is serving as his KLAP monitor. Cal Williams has assured me that he is in full compliance with his plan. That was just as of last week, but I have nothing in writing.
And that monitoring agreement and the probation plan, by its terms at least, looks to expire of like April of this year. It has expired. And I think that the agreement says that there's an agreement to continue the monitoring plan throughout probation. But I assume the parties also intend to extend the probation plan beyond that term as well, but I didn't see that language explicitly, but I assume that's the agreement. Of the
Yes, I
parties.
mean, the parties would, I would imagine Mr. Sampson would be in agreement to continuing the terms of probation for however long this court ultimately orders him.
Your deal, I got a little confused going, your deal that you're monitoring.
1 year.
Is that paragraph 36 of the summary submission agreement? Or maybe it's 37. Is there anything in the terms of the summary submission agreement that aren't already incorporated in the probation plan or the monitoring agreement? Or are those just sort of a summary of those terms in those two documents?
I believe all the terms from the submitted probation plan are included in there. I'm not for sure if I don't believe all the terms of the monitoring agreement. Actually, maybe C. But I believe that the intent of Deputy Disciplinary Administrator both was to include all the conditions by reference, at least from the probation plan and the monitoring.
But there's no new terms, so to speak, in the summary submission agreement itself. It's,
As far as I know,
Yeah.
they're not.
Can you remind me what happened in the underlying criminal case?
He pled guilty to 3 counts of disorderly conduct in September of 2021.
Battery?
Nope, no battery.
And disorderly conduct. And so what was the sentence?
It was 12 months of probation with an underlying 90-day. In conclusion, the ODA would ask the court to accept the party's summary submission agreement, impose the party's recommended sanction of a stayed 1-year suspension, and place Mr. Sampson on probation for 1 year, subject to the conditions laid out in the summary submission agreement. Questions for me?
Good afternoon, Your Honors. May it please the court. Mark Samsel, the respondent. First of all, I want to apologize. It is my conduct that got all of us here today and used the court's time and resources of everybody else here. As you've seen a lot of in the documents, it was 99% or more a manic episode from a bipolar disorder I didn't know I had. And if you would have asked me to tell you what bipolar disorder was before this stuff started, I couldn't have told you anything. It started actually a few years before any of this that is before you today. It started with cycles of depression that went on for weeks and months at a time. I started seeking treatment at that time. Wasn't later diagnosed until way on down the line that it was bipolar disorder instead of depression. So we treated depression, thought we beat it, and this cycle continued. And so to address one of the justice's questions, a very good question about the length of time between the first incident and the second incident. That's, as I learned, mania can go on for weeks or months at a time, especially when your brain is in that elevated, agitated state. And Dr. Lambert mentions this in his letter that's in the record in more detail, but just very briefly, I was attending those criminal proceedings. And then of course I was unfortunately also a state representative at the time. So it was highly publicized and agitating more than perhaps just a regular proceeding had you bipolar disorder. So my brain was continually staying in that agitated manic mode. By definition, when you're in manic mode, that means you're not able to identify you're up in that state of mind. So that was the length of time, Your Honor. The first time was in the classroom, and then yes, weeks and then even months later, as I wrote that letter, I thought God was calling me to still make this an event to bring attention to mental health. I obviously was wrong in hindsight, but at the time I thought I was correct. That's why I made the mistake of putting it on state letterhead instead of a personal letter. Something of that nature, and I regret that I did it, and I apologize that I did it. I don't know that my intent was ever to try to influence them. I honestly was just trying to communicate with those two individuals, and the attorney, I don't know, for whatever reason, didn't really want me talking to them, even though I thought I had the right to since I was the defendant. But if the court has any questions about that, I'm happy to answer those. I also want to thank Mr. Vogelsberg for stepping in today. Amanda Voth did an exceptional job working with me. I appreciate her professionalism. I appreciate KLAP and my monitor, everybody who was involved helping me through this process. It has not been an easy process, but it's one that I'm very thankful. I had a great career leading up to this incident. I worked with some wonderful attorneys that got to mentor from up at the law firm in Kansas City while this bipolar stuff was going on unknowingly and then after the fact. So I got to learn from some of the best. And I'm very appreciative of everyone in that who's also supporting. But I guess for today's purposes, though, we're asking you to approve the SSA. To address the justice's question about the criminal proceedings, I did apply for a diversion at the time on the basis that it was a manic episode. I think they made the right decision in denying that because I was still manic while I was making that application to the court. So we went through the process then. I worked very closely with the district attorney, as I've tried to with everyone. I guess it would be helpful for the court to know, I think finally in about September of 2021, when the criminal proceedings, we finally reached that agreement, my brain finally was able to come down from that manic episode that it was in, because that's when the agitation, the news proceedings, all of those things had finally slowed down and stopped. And my brain not only returned to more of a normal level, if you will, but then started dipping down into the depressive state over the course of days, weeks, and months. And that's finally, thank goodness, I regained my wits enough to listen to Dr. Lambert as he's saying, I think you've got bipolar disorder. We need to try some different treatment for that. We tried a couple medicines that did not work. Of course, with mental health, it takes weeks, 2 months, 3 months in order for those medicines to start taking effect. So for 2 or 3 months, the first one did not work. Same with the second one for another 2 or 3 months. So it wasn't until, as counsel mentioned, February 22, we went with old school lithium. That's the gold standard, which I did not know at the time, but thank goodness it has worked ever since then. So I have not had a single symptom, either manic, depressive, ever since that medicine finally started working in about February 2022, right around that time frame. So a little over 2 years now.
Let me ask you, looking forward, assuming we were to do the probation period, all that, what would be the nature of your law practice?
Good question, Your Honor. Not much different than what I've been doing recently. I did, to be honest with you, for a time as all that was going on, I pretty much shut down my law practice completely because mentally I wasn't in a good spot to be doing it. And of course, and that's what was leading to some of these things. So I actually took, it was a very humbling experience. A warehouse job that I did back in college just to keep things going and very minimal law practice. Once I got on the treatment and the lithium was working, I went back to more of like a part-time 2 or 3 local clients who I enjoy working with, construction clients, business contracts, collections, disputes, those types of things for them. And I've kind of been doing that ever since then. And then just more recently, it's been a little bit more of that. I tried to work with my doctor and make sure that our track moving forward was something that was consistent with me still having the bipolar symptoms fully in remission, which it has been, but that would be my intent moving forward, is still about 20 hours per week of doing business contracts, things of that nature, construction.
Solo practice.
Yes, sir.
And does that, do the agreements have, you have an attorney supervisor at all, or is it all just geared towards ongoing mental health treatments? And
Good question, Your Honor. We actually considered that, but we decided, looking at the history of it, and if the court wants us to do that, we could certainly reconsider it. But we decided with the KLAP monitor and just making sure my health stayed with my treatment, if that was in order, we didn't necessarily see any other, it was never per se a practice issue. It was my behavior that was causing the issue, which was mostly unrelated to the practice, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, I don't mean to excuse that behavior because it was terrible, but I think that's all I had, Your Honors. Again, I do deeply apologize. It was embarrassing, not just for me, but for everybody involved, the state of Kansas, the bar, and everybody else. I have done my absolute best as I've moved through, especially once I got back to where my mental health was back in my normal state. To be very transparent with it, very honest with it, as difficult as it might be, but try to help others with mental health in the profession. They still don't know what causes it, but I would bet quite a bit that I think it was cumulative stress and burnout from the law practice itself. Of course, then you throw on the state representative stuff and some other things, but certainly have learned a lot through this process. I'm happy to do whatever the court, KLAP, the disciplinary administrator's office would like me to do moving forward. But it is, I mean, as much as I wish this whole thing could have been avoided, I'm trying to do my best to use it for as much public good as possible. As you saw in the record, I did actually go to some length of writing that article for the Kansas City Star, of kind of giving my not only public apology, but this is kind of the transparent things of, as crazy as it sounds and it was, of the classroom and all the other stuff, this is how the brain got in that condition where you didn't even realize those were the things that were going on. So in closing then, unless the court has any questions, we would ask the court to approve the summary submission agreement, and I thank the court for its time.
How are you doing now?
Your Honor, I've been doing great ever since the lithium started working 2 years ago. And I actually honestly enjoy the practice of law again, which for even 3 or 4 years prior to the incident leading to this, the depressive cycles and the other things that had started, it was not fun. And I was seeking help with my mentors and others within the law firm and professionals, and we just didn't know what it was. So that whole cycle, in hindsight, if there was a way that I could have learned more about mental health earlier, I wish the whole bar would know that type of stuff. But ever since, Dr. Lambert has been amazing. He was actually a former law practitioner, and he was smarter than me and got out of the practice of law, then went back to medical school. But following his recommendation for lithium, which he's told me, going by the book only works about 10% of the time in mental health, but that is what has done the trick for me. If I ever get any inkling, or as my parents or family or friends, as I told them, if you ever get any inkling that I'm off base, please, 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 not only tell me, but my doctor or whoever you need to, because this whole experience is not one anyone would ever want to go through. Thank you, Your Honors.
Unless the court has any questions for me, I would wait.
So thank you to both of you for your arguments. The court will take this matter under advisement.
So the court issued its written decision, and there was not a lot of discussion. They said in the disciplinary proceeding, this court generally considers the evidence, the disciplinary panel's findings, and the parties' arguments to determine whether KRPC violations exist and, if they do, the appropriate discipline to impose. attorney misconduct must be established by clear and convincing evidence. It's kind of funny they're citing here. Clear and convincing evidence is evidence that causes the fact finder to believe that the truth of the facts asserted is highly probable. And they're citing Henry Morton, which is the case we just covered just a short while ago. The disciplinary administrator provided Samsel with adequate notice of the formal complaint. The disciplinary administrator provided Samsel with adequate notice of the hearing before the panel, but he waived that hearing after entering into the summary submission agreement. The Kansas Board for Discipline of Attorneys approved the summary submission and canceled the formal hearing under Rule 223E2. As a result, the factual findings in the summary submission are deemed admitted. See Supreme Court Rule 228G1. Rule 223 establishes the following requirements for a valid summary submission agreement. An agreement between the disciplinary administrator and the respondent to proceed by summary submission must be in writing and contain the following: an admission that the respondent engaged in misconduct, a stipulation as to the following: the contents of the record, the finding of fact, the conclusions of law, including each violation of the Kansas Rules of Professional Conduct, the rules relating to the discipline of attorneys, or the attorney's oath of office, and any applicable aggravating and mitigating factors. A recommendation for discipline, a waiver of the hearing on the formal complaint, and a statement by the parties that no exceptions to the finding of fact or the conclusions of law will be taken. Here, the written summary submission agreement contained all information required under Rule 223, and the summary submission and the party stipulations before us established by clear and convincing evidence the charged conduct violated KRPC 8.4 B, E, and G. Thus, we adopt the findings and conclusions set forth in the summary submission. The remaining issue is deciding the appropriate discipline. The parties jointly recommend a 1-year suspension of Samsel's license, and that the suspension be stayed and Samsel be placed on probation for 1 year. But an agreement to proceed by summary submission is advisory only and does not prevent us from imposing discipline greater or lesser than the parties' recommendations. After full consideration, we hold that a 2-year suspension is the appropriate discipline under the circumstances. We acknowledge respondent's mental health was a contributing factor to his misconduct, and he has made significant progress in this respect upon diagnosis and adherence to a successful treatment protocol. But given the nature of the underlying conduct, we believe a suspension of more than 1 year is warranted. They cite Harrington, and in that case, it was said, imposing 2-year suspension on attorney convicted of battery, driving under the influence, and obstruction of an official duty. And in Fram, imposing 3-year suspension on an attorney convicted of driving under the influence and 2 counts of aggravated battery. Respondent's license is thus suspended for 2 years. The suspension is stayed, conditioned on respondent's successful performance and completion of 2 years probation, subject to the terms and conditions of probation plan and the KLAP monitoring agreement. Additionally, to ensure the respondent is best positioned to succeed and that the public is adequately safeguarded while respondent practices law in a solo practice setting, the 2 years probation is also subject to a practice supervision plan approved by the disciplinary administrator's office. It is therefore ordered that Mark Samsel is suspended for 2 years, effective the date of this opinion, in accordance with Supreme Court Rule 225A3. For violations of 8.4 B, E, and G, the suspension is stayed conditional upon Samsel's successful participation and completion of a 2-year probation period. Probation will be subject to the terms set out in the probation plan and KLAP monitoring agreement referenced in the parties' summary submission agreement and the practice supervision plan as approved by the disciplinary administrator's office. No reinstatement hearing is required upon successful completion of probation. It's further ordered that the cost of these proceedings be assessed to respondent and that this opinion be published in the official Kansas reports. So this opinion was filed on June 14th, 2024. So he will have until June 14th, 2026 to stay out of trouble, stick to his regimen, and continue practicing law. Hopefully by the rules of the court, not the rules of the Lord. There you go. Until next time.